All right, Lance Pugmire is here, boxingscene.com, payperview.com, good friend of the podcast. And Lance, we've got a lot to get into on this show. And I want to start by looking back on what we saw this past weekend. We had a terrific upset of the year, maybe knockout of the year. Angelo Leo, new 126-pound champion. He knocks out Luis Lopez. Terrific performance by Leo. Now a new player in the 126-pound division, which needs some new players, needs some blood. That's not the most electric division right now, despite the fact that you've got Naoya Inoue, poised at some point to move into it and start collecting world titles there. But the better fight, maybe fight of the year, was in Las Vegas, where we had Vergil Ortiz, Serhii Bohachuk just go at it for 12 rounds. Ortiz coming out with a narrow and, certainly if you're a member of Bohachuk's team, a disputed decision win to become an interim 154-pound champion. You were ringside for that fight, which must have been a fun watch from start to finish. Let me start here. The decision, all three judges had it very narrow for Vergil Ortiz. Bohachuk picked up a couple of knockdowns during this fight. How did you score it? Did you have a problem with the decision? How did you see that?
Usually I do try to score it. This time I was really facing a deadline where I didn't score it the way I usually did. But I did, when the scores were read, Chris, I actually was fine with it, because even though Vergil Ortiz was knocked down, they were kind of flash knockdowns. And I think you could make the case even in the 8th round. I would never do this. But, usually it's a 10-8 round if you get knocked down. But Vergil otherwise dominated that round. So I think you can make the case that, he deserves some credit there. And then additionally, I actually thought Bohachuk won the 10th round. But, they gave it to Vergil. They gave Vergil rounds that he had never been to. Rounds 10, 11, and 12. He won them all. And for me, that decides the fight. I mean, if Bohachuk really needed to win that fight, where was he in those rounds, especially the last two? And remember, he got backed up in the 12th with everything was on the line in that last round. So I'm not going to sit here and cry over it, and I'm not saying that Loeffler and the trainer Manny Robles were crying over it, but they were pretty upset and steamed. It reminded me a lot of the Manny Pacquiao, Juan Manuel Marquez second fight that I also scored for Pacquiao, and the other side was so upset. But it's it's one of those things where this happens in a close fight, and if you really want to take it away from the judges, then you have to do something extra special.
Yeah, there were calls of robbery afterwards coming from Manny Robles. There were calls of a need to overhaul the boxing judging system. I am anti-robbery. I am also pro overhauling the boxing judging system, because I think it is very, very bad. I think there are some very bad judges in boxing, and they need to be weaned out of boxing. I don't think, though, this fight was an example of bad judging or a robbery, right? I watched it back, and outside of those two knockdowns, which, as you said, were flash knockdowns, Ortiz wasn't hurt by either one of them. I thought Ortiz largely controlled the fight. He was more active. He landed the cleaner punches. Yeah, you've got to give Bohachuk credit for those two knockdowns and credit in the form of 10-8 rounds. But besides that, I thought Ortiz did much better work. And to your point, particularly in the championship rounds, he closed the show a lot better than Bohachuk did. I've seen Tom Loeffler, point to Ortiz's face is messed up, Bohachuk's is different. He knows that doesn't matter. He has the experience of Gennady Golovkin against Canelo Alvarez, where Golovkin's face was a mess and Canelo's was relatively clean. And you can certainly make a strong argument Golovkin won the first fight, maybe even the third fight. So how a guy looks afterwards is not a indicator of whether or not he won the fight. I just think, if Bohachuk and Manny Robles watch this fight back, they are going to see missed opportunities, chances for them to be active, chances for them to press the action. I thought they let this fight slip away much more than the judges took it away. But now that it's over, Lance, and look, there's a possibility certainly of a rematch. I wouldn't expect it to be next. There's bigger paydays out there for Vergil Ortiz. We now have to start looking at Vergil as in through the prism of the top guys at 154. That's not to dismiss Bohachuk. Bohachuk is a top guy at 154. I mean, he came in with one loss on his resume, and that was a pandemic loss to Brandon Adams. And a win is a win, a loss is a loss. But I do think because of the circumstance, that was a fight he was winning. For most of it, he got caught in the 8th round. It happens. Bohachuk, though, is a legit top 154. But now we're talking about Vergil against a Terence Crawford. We're talking about him against a Tim Tszyu. This was Vergil's first fight as a full 154. His last two, he had come in over the limit. They were very low-level fights. Both of them ended in first-round knockouts. Not competitive at all. What did you learn about Vergil Ortiz in the context of him being a real contender at 154?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. From the standpoint of when I watched this fight, those shots that have finished so many other men, throughout Vergil's career, were not doing any of the damage to Bohachuk. So definitely moving up to 154 was tough, and then dealing with a guy like Bohachuk was especially tough. This guy is just so damn rugged and strong. Vergil had never dealt with that. So what he did to compensate, and I thought was so impressive, and it really showed how well Vergil Ortiz is developing under the tutelage of Robert Garcia. He kept punching. He kept doing what he needed to do to win rounds. And then even in the late rounds, Garcia told him, hey, turn to the jab and double up off it. Show yourself as being more active, more consistent. You'll be more effective in landing the blows that you need. And he took those lessons, even though he's stressed and exhausted, and he executed them, and he won the fight because of it. So I think for Vergil Ortiz, it was, okay, I'm not seeing everything else that I've seen in knocking out all 21 opponents that I have before that. And he still has that knockout power. I believe that this is a huge credit to Bohachuk and how tough he is. Because in my opinion, he still will knock out some of the top tier 154 pounders at some point in his career, maybe even soon. Vergil Ortiz will. But look, I was very impressed with how he stepped up in class. Look, again, one of the things we know, Chris, right? When someone gets off the canvas and can still win a fight, and especially gets off the canvas twice and wins a fight, that says so much about who they are in their class. And so very impressed with Vergil Ortiz. I just really feel at this point that, if he wants to make the case that he feels like he's the best 154 pounder, who's going to argue with him?
Yeah, and he's going to get a chance to show that, I think, in early 2025. I think he's probably done for the rest of this year. It's his third fight this year. And even though the first two, as you mentioned, have only gone one round, you still got to go through training camps to get there. You've got to go through 6-8 week training camps. You've been around that Robert Garcia gym. Like, those training camps are hard. Like, they're physical. You do a lot of hard sparring. No problem with Vergil Ortiz taking off the rest of the year. And then we start talking about, is a Terence Crawford fight a reality? Now, I'm not yet ready, Lance, to, put the nail in the coffin of Crawford against Canelo. There are obviously some bad feelings right now between Canelo Alvarez and Turki Al-Sheikh. They've been going back and forth in interviews, not exactly saying the most flattering things about each other. But, money talks and, public pressure talks. And I certainly can see a Crawford-Canelo fight being revisited before the end of the year. That being said, Crawford and Ortiz have been circling each other for a couple of years now. Ortiz was the mandatory challenger for one of Crawford's titles, or the first Crawford title a couple of years ago. That fight never materialized. Crawford went on to bigger and more lucrative things. But now you've got Turki Al-Sheikh saying, I want to make Crawford against Vergil Ortiz. Is that a competitive fight in your mind, given what you saw from Crawford at 154 and now what you've seen from Vergil Ortiz?
Absolutely, because I never saw Terence Crawford hurt Madrimov, and I've got to say, I think that Vergil Ortiz, acquitted himself very well in this last fight. I mean, he's on, in my opinion, at least equal footing with Madrimov, and look, I think that I would definitely want to see that fight. I think it's probably the most competitive fight to make in the division, to be honest with you, Chris. That's the way I feel. I may be wrong. Oh, I know we just had a rankings. If you had to rank these guys right now, 1 to 10 really in the 154-pound division. If you everyone else is going to be against me, but I I had Ortiz number one. It's like, look, I don't think that Crawford's power is there at 154 until he proves me wrong against one of these guys. So he's going to have to win a decision, and he's going to be older. Can he win that decision? I actually feel, Chris, I think his better move, he has an opportunity still to try to stand as the first undisputed three division champion in the four belt era. The path is there. If he executes this or invokes this opportunity that he has to fight Sebastian Fundora for both the WBO and WBC belts, he's only one win after that away from being undisputed at 154. Why would he go to Vergil Ortiz other than you got turkey money on the line?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good point. I do wonder, though, unless the Saudi money is put into play, like, what does Fundora do? Like, does he go straight into a Crawford rematch or Crawford matchup, or does he vacate that belt to move forward with what's probably a more winnable fight against Errol Spence, which has been discussed at length? And you reported on this week, the Bakram Murtalayev fight, potentially against Tim Tszyu, happening later this year. I would make Tim Tszyu a big favorite in that fight. Shout out to Main Events and all the money they made for Murtalayev. Like, I mean, God, he's been collecting checks for like 5 years now while he's been waiting for that opportunity. So he's done well financially, but I do think Tim Tszyu is a better fighter than he is. So yeah, I mean, if you can't get if it's two fights to get all four belts, I can see it. If he's got to take an interim fight in between, and that interim fight is Vergil Ortiz, does Terence Crawford want to fight 3 more times, I guess is the question. I can see him fighting 2 more times. Right. Does he want to fight 3 more times at age 37? He's been very selective with his opponents in recent years. I mean, he got the undisputed 147 in large part because one guy had all those other belts, right? Like, so does he want to, chase Tim Tszyu, chase Sebastian Fundora, take on a Vergil Ortiz in between, which would be a very physical fight. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Only Terence Crawford knows the answer. And obviously, money talks. He said, in the ring after the win over Madrimov that, look, it's about the payday. It's about the bag. Like, I want to take care of my family for now and certainly for future generations. So if that money's on the table, maybe he does it. But I guess I'll be interested to see. What do you think happens with the Fundora stuff? Do you think, are you expecting the WBO to order Fundora to face Terence Crawford? Do you think that he would take that fight, or do you think this long-discussed Spence fight is the direction he and his team want to go?
I honestly feel, in talking to our good friend Samson Lukowitz, he obviously is saying all the right things about, look, Sebastian Fundora is a unified champion. We want him to hang on to all the belts. So whatever the WBO tells us to do, we will do. That's what he's saying at this hour. But let's be honest. I feel as if we saw Errol Spence up in the ring right after Fundora defeated Tim Tszyu. That's the fight that they ideally want. So they're going to let this situation play out. They know exactly what's going on right now with Turki Al-Sheikh saying that he wants Ortiz to fight Crawford. They're going to watch this thing. I believe, I've been told that the deadline is the end of this week for Terence to say that he has the right to invoke this fight by the end of the year against Fundora. So if he can't make a decision and, that this deadline passes, then Fundora is free to go take a fight against Spence. And then Crawford is going to be moving to Ortiz. So it's a heck of a decision. It's Terence Crawford's decision to make. But I agree with you. It's all about the money. And Terence Crawford deserves this opportunity. I mean, we know what a distinguished career he has had. And if all this money is on the table from the Saudis, if I'm Terence Crawford, I probably would go for that and secure the generational wealth rather than this legacy play in the sport.